Howdy YouTube, this is Steven, and I want to share an article that I ran across while I was on the internet. The title of the article is Mejorar la Raza, an example of racism in Latino culture. And um, it was written by Maria Alejandra Casale Harton. And it was published on the Huffington Post website. All right, so here we go. And as you guys know, I'll read the article and give my thoughts and opinions as I go. Mejorar la Raza is a common phrase used in Latin American countries which means improve the race. It implies that you should marry or have children with a whiter person so you'll have better looking kids. All right, so for a lot of people, particularly people of color, this isn't really something new. You know, um, whether there's a phrase for it in your community or not, wherever you're coming from, it's still there. The concept is still sort of there, even though if there's a phrase or not. Let's see. The phrase is used by people of any race without much thought. A year ago, a Facebook post by a Latino living in Europe started a heated argument about the history of whitewashing in Latin America. She said, Mejor la raza, to justify the massive rape of indigenous women by European colonizers. A few hours later, the girl erased the post and dismissed it as a joke. I like to hope she felt embarrassed after being called a racist on social media. All right, so apparently this Latin American woman said that it seemed like she was justifying the rape of indigenous women by saying, oh, this is advancing the race. But really, that rape is the reason why people have this mentality in the first place, because it's like, okay, European colonizers raped women, indigenous women, thus creating Mestizos, as they call it, like people who are mixed with indigenous and European blood, usually Spanish, but indigenous and European blood. Thus, you have a group now that is somewhat above the indigenous group, but also a part of the indigenous group, I think, or at least related to the indigenous group. So that's creating conflict there as well. And, it's sad that this woman will justify this. Even if this was truly just a joke, it was not a very it's like, where's the humor? That was unfortunately a reality for a lot of indigenous women, as well as other women of color during the colonial time period. So I don't think that's something you should joke about. All right, next. As a child, I heard my aunt asking my cousin to break up with the girl he was dating because he would mejor la raza. All right, sorry, because he should mejorar la raza. Her biggest concern seemed to be the girl's Afro-Latino heritage. Quote unquote, you don't want to bring ugly kids into the world. What if you have a girl and she comes out with pelo malo? All right. So yeah. Unfortunately, that's kind of ain't nothing new, really, to hear someone thinking like this. But yeah, people do hold these sort of. People kind of hold these ideas because, white is right. At least in the Americas, white is right. So people often do this or feel that they should do this. Whether it's on a conscious level or a subconscious level, a lot of people do kind of seem to gravitate towards this. Not everybody, to be fair, but a significant portion. Let's see. My aunt thought she was talking some sense into her son. After all, pelo malo literally translates to bad hair, but it really means afro-textured hair. She didn't think she was being racist or mean-spirited. She thought it was her duty to point out how hard her imagery, her imaginary granddaughter's life would be if she inherited her mom's curls. And yeah, bad hair, pelo malo, that ain't nothing new either, you know. Oftentimes, it's like the standard is straight hair. Thus, if you do not have straight hair, then the less straight it is, the worse it is. And if you have hair that is extremely kinky, then that's like the worst of worst hair, and it's considered bad hair. So yeah, good hair versus bad hair, like those phrases aren't anything new to people of color, you know, at least to certain people of color. But yeah, so far this ain't really much new here, at least for me. Let's see. Her argument didn't add up. I was a light-skinned young girl with dark-skinned parents, uncles, aunts, and cousins. I was very confused. Those were her relatives too. My aunt wasn't even white herself. Why did she, like many other Latinos, justify racism with standards of beauty? Because they feel like, unfortunately, those standards of beauty kind of lend people privilege in society. So, in her mind, she's probably thinking, hey, give your child a good head start in life. You know, don't do your child wrong. Like, give your child the best advantage you can give her, or him, or whoever. But unfortunately, with that mindset, you're still sort of passively supporting white supremacy, you know? Or I guess maybe even actively at this point. Let's see. Next, why do we associate improvement with whiteness? That's a good question. Why is it? Uh, I'd say it's just because of white supremacy again. You know, why do we call afro-textured hair bad hair? Because it's just so different from Caucasian people hair, you know, white people hair. And I think oftentimes people don't really want to see and recognize the beauty in it as well. Women who have afro-textured hair often change their hair texture because it allows them to better assimilate into society. As well, it allows them to conform to beauty standards that even men within their own race and communities adhere to. You know, they want their women to have long, silky hair, even though that's not the way their hair grows. And where do you think that idea comes from? The media, maybe? Let's see. Why were the women around me obsessed with straight, silky hair? I'm still pondering these questions almost 20 years later. They're obsessed because, again, assimilation and standards of beauty. It allows them to assimilate and to conform to a standard of beauty, thus making them beautiful. You know, beauty is often, beauty and femininity are linked together, and women want to be feminine typically. Women want to be seen as beautiful typically. Thus, in order to be feminine and beautiful, you have to have this hair texture, seemingly. So they want that hair, they want to be viewed as women, you know, viewed as beautiful women. Beautiful, feminine women. All right. Next, this subtle form of racism is so ingrained in our culture that people measure themselves unapologetically against the supposed standard of beauty. In Venezuela, I remember friends of mine saying, quote unquote, yo soy negrito, pero un negrito fino, which literally translates to, I am a little black person, but a fine little black person. The Spanish diminutive suffix ito is commonly used to infer small and less harsh. Instead of identifying yourself as black, you add ito to reduce your blackness. Never heard of that. Learn something new every day. Followed by the use of fine, fino, which usually means you have whiter facial features such as a thin nose or light eyes. To fit into a society constructed mode by peers, let's see, constructed mode, my peers felt the need to highlight their whiteness. Where does that come from? Where does that come from? I wonder, like these ideas don't just come out of nowhere, they come from like the media and socialization as well as the school systems, like, not seeing yourself reflected in this material that you learn in school, not seeing yourself reflected in the media as much. And if you do see a reflection, it's like a negative reflection, or either the people they look like you but don't have the same hair texture as you, or something like that. So yeah, it's just, I guess a further extension of white supremacy. you know let's see. Now, as an adult, I see how subtle and deep racism can be in Latin culture. Children aren't born racist, they learn racist behaviors as they grow. We have to be mindful of how language describes us, how we talk about others, and what we teach our children. We perpetuate the stereotypes that diminish the immeasurable value of our multicultural ethnicity. We shouldn't be glorifying one race over the other. I agree, but for some reason it seems like that sometimes. You know, I feel like other races aren't really um, put on a pedestal at times. Like we can. There's so much beauty, or variations of beauty, but we seem to concentrate on, I guess, the one that's most accessible. Which is white beauty. You know, and also I think this is the reason why you know a lot of men of color go after and date and marry white women. You know, because I guess on some level, perhaps, and it's not true for every single um, man of color, because it's all, it's different situations for different folks. Everyone's not exactly the same situation, but I think that this sort of mindset has something to do with that. Thus, the women in their communities feel like they have been like feel like they're not being put on the pedestal and they're being overlooked, and people aren't valuing them and their femininity and their beauty, thus creating more friction within the community. So yeah, this stuff, it does sort of, it's around you and then it gets internalized inside of you and then it comes out in your actions. Let's see. Next, Arlene Davila, professor of anthropology, social and cultural analysis at NYU, pointed out on NPR, some think that Latino television, quote unquote, you can't apply the same the same standards of racism because we have our humor, and we're not racist because we are Latino and we can get away with that without getting regulated. It does kind of maybe seem like that because, like, I'm speaking Spanish, so, maybe they won't catch on to it. But, Spanish ain't that foreign of a language in the United States now, you know? And as well, maybe they're thinking, hey, we're all Latinos, we're all classified as Latinos, so I can speak about another Latino without being considered racist, right? But as many of us know, Latino and Hispanic are ethnicities that don't have a race, like it's not a biological thing. Like it's a ethnicity, and it's not based on biology. It's an ethnicity, not a race. But we use those ethnicities because the Latino population is so diverse that it's just easier to go with, okay, you're Latino, you're Hispanic. And as well, it protects, pretty much it protects like white privilege and white supremacy as well. You know, you able to classify this group and put them in here because you don't want people going into the white group and getting the white privilege and, you know, benefiting from whiteness. You want to protect the whiteness. Let's see. But some Latinos do identify themselves as white, and some Latinos are of European ancestry, but some are not, and they still consider themselves white for some reason. Possibly in the country they come from, they're considered white. Maybe. Let's see. Next, but just because we're a minority doesn't give us a free pass. Earlier this year, Venezuelan talk show host Rodner Figueroa was fired from Univision after comparing the First Lady to an ape on El Gordo y la Flaca. News of the dismal of the news of the dismissal quickly spread across American media. The New York Times reported Figueroa's new, now famous line, quote unquote, "Well, watch out. You know that Michelle Obama looks like she's from the cast of Planet of the Apes." He immediately justified his remarks saying, quote unquote, "But it's true." Whether the comment was racist enough to justify an immediate discharge from the network is not in question. Who would blame Univision for firing Figueroa? Still can't pronounce that name. For a Spanish language network that's established itself amongst the most viewed in the country, taking a firm stance against racism is essential. So yeah, Univision ultimately did do the right thing. As far as Rodner Figueroa is concerned, I think ultimately, I guess this sort of throws back into people viewing black people as sort of subhuman, you know, and that's been a theme throughout the history when it came to black people in the Americas. It was very convenient for people to treat them and view them as subhuman because it helped justify the treatment that black people were, given. Because, the act of slavery and, servitude, forced servitude, it was a massive violation of human rights, and they had to justify that because, some people had a moral conscience and felt bad about it. But when you said, hey, these people aren't really human, they're subhuman. They're just like basically they're animals. So then it's like, oh, it's okay, oh, okay, it's an animal, it's not a human being, so it's okay to treat this being like this because they're are a lesser being than you know. And that mindset still sort of lingers today in society. That's why I think that the police is often very aggressive towards people of color, especially black men of color, because of that as well. When it comes to like police, like when people are advocating for more force to be used by the police, the police to use more force, I think oftentimes they have a picture of a person of color in their mind as the person who's receiving the force versus themselves, particularly when white people are advocating for more police aggression. And as well, when it comes to black women, sometimes in beauty, I think people kind of view black women to an extent in somewhat a similar light. Thus, when issues or situations of maybe like rape or domestic violence comes up, people aren't as swift to act because it's like, okay, and subconsciously they relate this person to being subhuman, perhaps, you know. So this stuff all connects. Like, this stuff is not isolated. It all connects and works its way into the much bigger picture. Right. And the last part. TV networks should do their part reprimanding racist remarks and by representing us more fairly in their programming. Latinos come in all races. There you go. Latinos come in all races, colors, and flavors. Flavors. Which is why Mejorar la Raza shouldn't have a place in our community. For Figueroa, his comment came with a high price. For the rest of us, we might not get fired for saying racist things, but we're still responsible and liable for them. That is true. And yeah, when you say Latinos come in all races, some people are like, what? No, you're Latino, you know? Even some Latino people will probably say that. But yeah, like, there are, white Latinos, black Latinos, Latinos who are mixed with black and white, Latinos who are mixed with white and indigenous, indigenous Latinos. There are even, Middle Eastern Latinos and Asian Latinos. There might even be some East Indian Latinos. Like, it's all like Latin America is such a diverse place, you know. And unfortunately, that diversity is not always celebrated. But yeah, that's the end of the article. And yeah, ain't really nothing new here. Not from me, Perhaps, ultimately, maybe you guys learned something new. If you want, whoever watched this, maybe you learned something new. But for me, you know, I've heard of this before, and this is not anything new. Race plays a big factor in people's quality of life, you know, and people of color are aware of that. I think it's more so white people who are not aware of that, and as well, they're not really taught to be aware of that. It's taught to be something that's just ignored. Hmm. But yeah, there you have it. Feel free to comment, feel free to subscribe, feel free to give me a thumbs up. Your feedback and support are extremely appreciated and extremely valued. Until the next news article analysis, adios and goodbye for now.